Welcome back to part 2 of the digestive system. Today we're going to pick up with the stomach and go through the anal canal. So the stomach's job is to mix food with gastric juices and initiate protein digestion. It's also going to absorb small amounts of nutrients and it's going to move food into the small intestines. So parts of the stomach will be the top region, which is referred to as the cardiac region, then followed by the fundic region, then the body region, and then the pyloric region. So looking there, you can see where the esophagus enters. So we have the esophagus entering here. You're going to have that cardiac sphincter that's going to shut it off between the esophagus and the stomach. And so this would be the cardiac region through here. Then you have what's known as the fundic region of the stomach through here. Then you have the body of the stomach, which is going to come down through this section. That's the main portion of the stomach. And then you have the pyloric region, which is going to be here. So with the cardiac region, that's where you find that cardiac sphincter. It's going to be a strong circular muscle that's going to close off the esophagus to the stomach, but it's not going to be nearly as strong as that pyloric sphincter. That pyloric sphincter is going to close off the entrance here from the last section of the stomach going into the first section of the small intestine known as the duodenum. And that's going to be a straight section that it goes into. Now the mucous membrane is going to be the inner lining of the stomach. It's going to have many gastric pits, which are going to be the openings of gastric glands. There's going to be 4 cell types that are going to compose these gastric glands, and each one's going to have its own specific job. The first one's going to be the mucus cell. The surface mucus cells and mucous neck cells are going to be there to produce and secrete mucus. This is going to help to protect the inner lining of the stomach from being digested. So your stomach on the inside is going to be protected with this mucus, and if the enzymes or if the hydrochloric acid eats through this mucus, or it could be damaged due to different types of chemicals taken in, medications, actually stress can damage this lining. It could actually eat into the epithelium of the stomach and cause a gastric ulcer. Now looking back through here, one thing I did forget to mention is that you're going to have folds within the stomach. That's going to help increase the surface area and also helps that stomach be able to expand as it fills up. And those folds are going to be referred to as the rugae. Now all of this on the inside here is going to be protected with that mucus lining that's produced from those mucus cells. Next, you have your chief cells. These are going to secrete the digestive enzyme called pepsinogen. This enzyme is not going to be activated at first. Pepsinogen is going to be responsible for digesting proteins, but it has to be exposed to hydrochloric acid before it can become activated. Once it's exposed, it becomes activated and begins the digestion of proteins. It's also going to be known for secreting the gastric lipase. Lipase is going to be an enzyme that can also help to break down different lipids that are going to be found within that food, so different fats. Parietal cells are going to secrete hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. The hydrochloric acid in the digestion and intrinsic factor is going to help the small intestine absorb things such as B12. That's going to be very important because it's going to be needed for red blood cell production. The G cells are important because they secrete the hormone gastrin. Gastrin is going to stimulate the stomach to secrete hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen. So without gastrin, neither one of these two substances would be secreted into the stomach. So looking at this gastric pit, this is going to be a simple take of or picture drawing of one of the sections inside of the stomach. You can see that lamina propria, that's going to be the underneath tissue. You see the different gastric glands that are going to be found within that gastric pit. And then you see the different types of mucosa or mucus cells that are going to be found in this area. So you see the surface mucosa that secretes the mucus. You see the neck cells, they also secrete mucus. The parietal cells are going to secrete that hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. The chief cells will secrete pepsinogen and gastric lipase. And then those G cells secrete the hormone gastrin. And then, of course, all of that is going to be attached to the bottom basement layers, which will be the muscularis mucosa and then the submucosa. Here's another view of what it looks like with these different cells that are going to be found within the stomach. Regulation of gastric secretions. Well, your gastric mucosa will release up to about 3 liters of gastric juice a day. The vagus nerve is going to stimulate the secretion to cause the secretion to produce more of these gastric juices. The sympathetic stimulation or sympathetic nervous system will decrease the secretion of this gastric juices. Hormonal control will largely be with gastrin, but also histamine and acetylcholine. So these enzymes will go up and hydrochloric acid secretion will go up with these hormonal releases. Here's another view that is showing how the acetylcholine receptor is going to be able to receive. You see the gastrin receptor and you see the histamine receptor. All of these will go into this parietal cell, which is responsible for secreting things like hydrochloric acid, and it shows you that apical membrane or the outer membrane of that specific cell. So with the pancreas, cells are going to secrete pancreatic juices into the duodenum of the small intestine. Remember, that's that first section of small intestine. That's going to be a straight section that comes directly off of the stomach after your pyloric sphincter. Pancreatic amylase is going to be there to digest starch and glycogen and other into disaccharides, which are going to be 2 moleculed sugars. Pancreatic lipase is going to digest fatty acids and glycerols. You also have nucleases, which will digest the nucleic acids into nucleotides that are found within the cells of the food, and proteases, which are going to secrete inactive forms of enzymes such as trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen, and the procarboxypeptidase. Here, you can see the liver with that falciform ligament that's running its way through the center, and then the round ligament that comes off of it. Notice that within the liver, it's divided up into 2 lobes, which we've discussed before. The right lobe is going to be larger, of course. The left lobe is going to be smaller. And right underneath the section of that right lobe, you're going to find the gallbladder. That gallbladder will come in by the cystic duct, so the bile comes off of the gallbladder through the cystic duct. It joins in with the common hepatic duct and forms the common bile duct. That common bile duct makes its way down through into the duodenum where it will release its products. Underneath, look at the pancreas. That pancreas, notice how it's divided up into sections. It has a tail, it has a body, it has a head to it. The head's going to be the larger section that comes in and kind of is slightly attached or fits in with the duodenum there. Notice how it's going to have what's known as a pancreatic duct or duct of Wirsung, and that's going to come down, and it also joins in with the hepatic or common bile duct, and from there it can join the hepatopancreatic ampulla where it's going to release its substances into the duodenum, or it can come through that accessory duct or duct of Santorini. This is going to be a pancreas of a cadaver that's going to show you all these different parts that we just looked at. Notice how it has that prominent pancreatic duct that's going to make its way through the center of the pancreas. And so that pancreas, it's attaching to the duodenum there right after it comes out of the stomach, and it's going to release things that are going to be in their inactive form, like trypsinogen, which will become activated into trypsin, the procarboxypeptidases, which will become carboxypeptidase, and the chymotrypsinogen, which will become chymotrypsin. All of these get excreted and go into the lumen section of the duodenum. Now, if it's an endopeptidase, these enzymes will digest the interior peptide bonds in a peptide molecule. This is going to be the things such as that trypsin and the chymotrypsin. If it's an exopeptidase, these enzymes are going to digest polypeptides at the carboxyl and amino ends. And so this is going to be your aminopeptidases and the carboxypeptidases. So secretion of pancreatic juices is going to be controlled by both the nervous and the endocrine systems. Remember, these 2 things work together in order to control everything in the body. The parasympathetic nerves are going to stimulate the secretion of pancreatic juices. Secretin is going to be a hormone that's going to be made by the duodenum of the small intestine. It's going to be responsible for the secretion of these pancreatic juices. Now, acid in the duodenum is going to stimulate the secretion. The cholecystokinin is going to be a hormone that's going to be made by the duodenum. It's released and stimulated by the presence of proteins and fats that are going to be found in the duodenum, and this is going to cause the pancreas to release pancreatic juices. Now, these pancreatic juices are going to be very important because they will bring the pH of the small intestine or the duodenum up. Remember, it's coming directly out of the stomach, so it does contain hydrochloric acid, so we need to bring that pH up along with digesting these different things. So these pancreatic juices will also be responsible for buffering the chyme that's coming out of the stomach and bringing the pH back up. Now, the sympathetic nervous system is going to decrease the secretion of pancreatic juices once everything comes back up to the pH that it needs to be at. The liver is going to be a digestive accessory organ. It structurally is going to be divided into two parts, which we just saw. It has a smaller left lobe and a larger right lobe. It is highly vascularized and has many sinusoids, which are going to be little vascular channels. And nutrients is going to be absorbed from the small intestine and is going to enter in through the hepatic portal vein and first go to the liver in order to feed the liver. It produces bile, which we said was a substance that's going to be composed of things such as bile salts. You can often think of those as the dish detergent of your digestive system. So it's a detergent, and it also has pigments in it from the breakdown of red blood cells. So as you're getting rid of these old, dead, worn out red blood cells, some of this pigment is going to be released through the fecal matter, and so that's going to give the fecal matter its dark brownish, sometimes orangey color, and it gives urine its color of yellow or dark orange. So here's a picture of the human liver again, and you can see the right and left lobe, and behind it you have your inferior vena cava and the aorta. Underneath the liver, you can look at different sections. You have that gallbladder there, which is attached underneath that right lobe. Notice that you have what's referred to as the cystic duct coming directly off of the gallbladder. You have the hepatic duct coming from the liver that's going to join in through the common bile duct. Now, running right alongside of that, you have that hepatic artery, which is going to help to feed and nourish the liver. And you have the hepatic portal vein, which is taking away the waste products and carbon dioxide. And of course, this shows you how the blood runs through the body. So it's going to pick up the different nutrients and everything and deliver it to the body, and it will pick up the waste products and get rid of it through the body. And so you see how it's going to be filtered out. It pumps through the heart, goes to the lungs, comes back fully oxygenated, and then pumps out to different sections of the body. This is a closer look at your section of the liver that shows you that has a central vein going through the center. It shows you how it has the sinusoid structure. And so you have lots of openings that are going to be going, lots of channels that go through. You have the hepatocytes, which are going to be the cells that make up the liver. And then the different branchings that are going to help to make that bile. And so here shows you, once they're made by the hepatocytes, you have the bile duct, which will send the bile from that bile canal through into it to exit and go towards the duodenum. Now, oxygenated blood from the hepatic artery is going to go to the hepatic sinusoid. Nutrient-rich deoxygenated blood from the hepatic portal vein, so that nutrients was absorbed from the stomach and it was sent directly to the liver. From there, it goes to the hepatic sinusoid, and you also have oxygenated blood that's coming directly from that hepatic artery. They come in together to the hepatic sinusoid, go through the central vein, the hepatic vein, the inferior vena cava, and then to the right atrium of the heart. Now, the liver is going to also be known for storing carbohydrates. In an animal, carbohydrates are stored in the form of glycogen. If it is a plant, it's glucose and then stored in a form of starch. But of course, we're animals, so we store it as glycogen. Glycogen will be stored in the body and liver, but also in the muscles. Also, the liver is going to store iron And it's going to get a lot of this iron from the dead, worn out blood cells that it's breaking down, and it's going to reuse this iron in creating new red blood cells. Also, retinol, which is going to be vitamin A, and calciferol, which is going to be vitamin D. So the red blood cells are going to be destroyed in the liver and in the spleen by cells called macrophages. They're going to come in, they're going to break them down. First thing that happens, it breaks it down into two parts. You have your heme group, which contains iron and protein. Then you have your globin group, which is just simply a protein. The iron is stored, and it's going to be held within the liver, and then the protein portion, the biliverdin, is going to be turned into bilirubin, and then it gets excreted within the bile. The globin is going to be digested, and since it's a protein, it gets broken into amino acids that then are going to be reused by the body to rebuild anything that's made of protein or any type of enzyme that it might need. Now, the gallbladder is going to store and release bile into the small intestine through the cystic duct. The bile is going to be made by the liver and is going to be composed of things such as water, bile salts, which help emulsify fats. That means it breaks it down into smaller pieces or particles that are easy to work with, bile pigments from the breakdown of red blood cells, cholesterol, and some electrolytes. The gallbladder is then going to be stimulated to release bile by the hormone cholecytokinin. This is going to be made and secreted by the duodenum. And so you have your right and left hepatic duct that come together at the bile duct, and that's going to be your common hepatic duct from the liver. The cystic duct is also going to come in from the gallbladder, and they form that common bile duct with your hepatic duct. And then the pancreatic duct can actually come in with it too, and then they both be released into the duodenum. And here's what it looks like in a drawing or a picture. So now we're going into the small intestine. The function of the small intestine is to complete digestion of chyme from the stomach. It's going to absorb nutrients and send leftover waste to the large intestine. It's going to be composed of three major portions, which we've talked about a little bit. It's made up of the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. The inner lining of the duodenum and the proximal portion of the jejunum are composed of finger-like projections called intestinal villi. These are going to help to increase the surface area of the intestine for absorption. And then, like I said, they have even smaller projections referred to as microvilli. So looking here, this is going to be a section of the small intestine. You see how you have these finger-like projections, but if you go in closer, notice with the epithelial cells, they have even smaller projections coming off. Those are going to be referred to as the microvilli or the brush border of those cells. This is where the absorption takes place, and it greatly increases surface area so the most absorption can take place as possible. Cells making up the villi have many enzymes that are going to be embedded within the cell membranes, things such as peptidases. These are going to help to break down and split proteins into individual amino acids so they can be reused by the body. It has sucrase, maltase, and lactase, which will split disaccharides into monosaccharides, so now they are going to be one sugar components, and lipase, which is going to split fats into fatty acids and glycerols in order for the body to use those. And so this shows you how all of these things will come together in the duodenum, or that section of the small intestine. And this shows you the different sections and where they're located when looking at the abdomen. All right, so looking at these a little bit closer. So you have your microvilli that's attached to each cell that's found in the villi. These are going to be your absorptive cells, so they absorb nutrients. You have your goblet cells, which are secreting mucus. You are going to have a mucus lining here. You have the enteroendocrine cells. These are going to secrete the hormone secretin, the cholecytokinins, and the GIPs. And then the bottom you have the Paneth cell, which is going to secrete lysozyme, and it's going to be capable of phagocytosis, or bringing things in and destroying them. And so this shows how with the villus, each villi is going to be able to absorb these different nutrients in. It can absorb the amino acids, the monosaccharides, into the bloodstream. And then it's going to be able to deliver some to the tissue and then take it back through the heart where it can become oxygenated and then deliver it to the other tissues of the body. And so here's just simply a chart showing enzymatic digestion in the human digestive system. So with the carbohydrates, they start to become digested in the oral cavity, pharynx, and esophagus using the with polysaccharides. So you're digesting things such as starch and glycogen using salivary amylase, and this breaks it down into smaller polysaccharides. From there, the stomach doesn't digest any more of these, but they do start to become digested even more in the small intestine, and then the epithelium of the brush border. And the proteins start being digested in the stomach, and then they make their way to the small intestine and down through the intestine. Nucleic acids actually start to be broken down and digested within the small intestine and the epithelium of the small intestine. And then fats begin to be digested and get absorbed in the lumen of the small intestine. So large intestine is going to be composed of 4 main portions. First, coming off of the ileum is going to be the cecum. That is a pouch-like structure at the beginning of the large intestine. Projecting from it is going to be what's referred to as the vermiform appendix, or what you know as your appendix. Very, very small. The appendix is known as a section of the large intestine that no longer has a function. In other primates, we see that it is there for fermentation of plant products, so anything that would have chlorophyll in it. With our bodies, we no longer use it, and it sometimes does become inflamed or infected, and it could cause lots of problems if you do not get it out very quickly once that happens. If it ruptures, it could be life-threatening. Next, going into the colon, that's going to be divided up into different portions. You have your ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid portions, followed by the rectum, and then it leaves the body through the anal canal. So looking here, coming off the ileum, notice you have your cecum, and then your little small finger-like projection, which is the appendix. Now from that cecum, it's going to go upwards through the ascending colon. Here's your appendix. And this little section here is your cecum. And so the food's coming out through the small intestine, comes through this ileocecal sphincter. That's going to be a very strong circular muscle. Once it enters into the cecum, it then will make its way up through the ascending colon. Then it comes through the transverse colon. Then it turns and makes its way down through the descending colon, and then into the curved portion known as the sigmoid colon, and then the rectum, and then out the anus. So that's how the food would travel. Now the rectum and anus are going to have sphincters as well, and the food does move through this section using peristalsis. And so that sphincter that you see right now, known as the internal anal sphincter, is going to be involuntary. It will hold very tightly. And then the external anal sphincter will be voluntary. So that's going to be the larger muscle on the outer portion that you can control. The job of the large intestine is going to be mainly to absorb water. It absorbs also electrolytes such as sodium and chloride, and then it also absorbs some vitamins like vitamins B and vitamin K. It will house bacteria. Now the small intestine is going to be made up of a sterile environment. Once it reaches the large intestine, this is where you are going to start to see the introduction of bacteria. Bacteria is going to be important because it helps to ferment things that are in the stomach. It helps to produce, like we said, vitamin K and vitamin B, and it's going to create gases such as methane, hydrogen gas, and carbon dioxide. It's also going to be responsible for storing and removing indigestible waste. So that's going to end us with the digestive system. We'll pick back up with the urinary system for our next module.